Amnesty International from 2001 to 2009. Under her leadership, Amnesty strengthened its work on political and civil rights, especially in the context of counterterrorism and armed conflicts, while also expanding its mandate to include economic, social, and cultural rights. The first woman to head the Amnesty International, she launched its first global campaign to stop violence against women and girls. From 2012 to 2019, Ms. Khan headed the International Development Law Organization, the only intergovernmental organization exclusively devoted to the rule of law and sustainable development. In that capacity, she co-convened the UN conference in preparation of the review of SDG 16 in 2019, the high-level group on justice for women in 2018, and the conference on rule of law in Africa in 2016. She expanded programs on access to justice, access to information, and effective institutions. She began her professional career with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, working for 21 years at headquarters and in various country operations. Ms. Khan has received several awards, including the Sydney Peace Prize in 2006 for her contribution to human rights. Born in Bangladesh, she studied at Manchester University and Harvard Law School. She visited the Philippines on an official mission in 2024, and now we will hear from her the key findings and recommendations from her final report.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. As many of you will know, I visited Philippines last year in January, towards the end of January last year for 2 weeks, and want to thank everyone who helped me on that visit, meeting me, providing me with information, testimony, and supporting the visit. I'm of course grateful to the government of the Philippines for extending the invitation. And last Wednesday, I presented my final report to the UN Human Rights Council after sharing a copy of the draft with the government. And you will have seen the government's reaction also in writing. Both my report and the government's report are available on the the High Commissioner for Human Rights website. Let me say, in terms of, before I start talking about my findings of the mission, I want to mention that just a few days after that, yesterday, in fact, there was another killing of a journalist in Philippines, in Mindanao. And her killing, I think, underlines once again my key finding that while this government, the administration of President Marcos, has made some changes, a lot more needs to be done. It is true that the situation under this administration is not as severe as had been under the previous administration, but in terms of real change, I think Philippines has to take a number of measures before it can turn the page on the past, particularly in relation to impunity, but also in relation to protection of civil society, human rights defenders, and journalists. One of my key findings, I will not go through the whole report, I will just highlight a few findings. One of my key findings was, of course, the dynamism of civil society. You have a very impressive, dynamic civil society. There is also a dynamic media sector with many news outlets, but that does not cover the problem that exists in terms of the harassment and persecution of many members of civil society and of media, of those working in media. In particular, I highlighted the practice of red tagging which is effectively vilification of people who are accused of belonging or supporting the Communist Party, which is banned in the Philippines. As a result of that, of course, a lot of human rights defenders, a lot of journalists, community journalists in particular, community media, are at risk, are at serious risk. And I am told that possibly the recent killing of Ali was also as part of this campaign of red tagging. In my report, I noted that over 467, I believe 467 cases of red tagging had been reported in the first 6 months or so of 2024, last year. The government's response has been that it does not condone or support red tagging. It has no policy on red tagging. My response has been, regardless of whether or not the government condones it officially or or whether there is an official policy on it, the truth is, the facts on the ground are that people are being red tagged, people are being endangered. And my position, I was pleased to note at the Human Rights Council, was supported, my finding was supported by the chair of the National Human Rights Commission. And therefore, I believe there is sufficient clear evidence now of this practice. The government claims it does not condone it. I would recommend, I have recommended to the government that it should issue an executive order denouncing the practice of red tagging and setting out very clearly the repercussions, the punishment of any official who is found indulging in that practice. I believe that the government needs to proactively address this particular practice, which is endangering the safety of many civil society leaders, of many activists, of many young people in particular. And that leads me to the situation of journalists and media. The parliament has adopted a couple of legislation to support the conditions, to improve the condition of media, but some major issues remain. One is, of course, impunity for crimes against journalists. The recent incident, the recent killing, only emphasizes the need for some special measures. I have recommended a special prosecutor to investigate and prosecute cases of killings of journalists. And that is, the government has not rejected that recommendation. The government claims that the current measures are sufficient with PT Form's follow-up with the Department of Justice. Obviously, the continued killings and the impunity that persists, a very high rate of impunity, by the way, over the past few years of killings of journalists and killing of other human rights defenders and others, remain to be solved. And because of that, again, I would insist that the government review this issue and take some special measures. Of course, I commend the government for following the indictment of the International Criminal Court of the handing over of previous President Duterte to The Hague, to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I have recommended that the government rejoin the Rome Statute and once again become part of the treaty, the Rome Treaty, which establishes the International Criminal Court. And I was pleased to note in the media that following my recommendation, a statement has come out of the presidential palace that the president may consider this recommendation. I hope that the president will consider and actually act on it to once again become a party to the statute that establishes the court. That will be an indication of this government's commitment to address impunity. In addition, however, the government must also strengthen its capacity nationally to properly investigate and prosecute cases relating to journalists. Let me also refer to some other recommendations that I've made related to the practice of red tagging and to the difficult situation in many communities with the security forces. I recommended that the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, NTF ELC, be also ILCAC, as you say, NTF ELCAC, as you say in the Philippines, should also be abolished. I know the president has decided not to implement that recommendation, but I would urge him to reconsider the situation, given the lack of confidence that communities and civil society have in this particular entity. The government should examine this body and consider whether a more independent, multi-stakeholder process for a more inclusive approach, including all elements of the communities that are affected by insecurity or that are being targets of peace building, whether another kind of a structure would not be better to address inequalities and other root causes and the drivers of insecurity. I have recommended that a number of laws need to be reviewed and removed, including the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012 and the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. I know that the Supreme Court has reviewed the Anti-Terrorism Act, but there still remains some shortcomings. I hope that the government will also seriously examine the legislative measures that I've made, that I've recommended. I was pleased to see some judicial activity on the issue of red tagging. There has been a court case at the civil level, civil court case, which has recognized the practice of red tagging as an abuse of rights. The Supreme Court itself has also taken the position that red tagging is such a threat to human rights that it can be subject to amparo. Given this progress that is being made, I hope the government will build on that progress and address some of these long-standing human rights to clearly distinguish, and doing so will clearly distinguish this administration from past practices of other administrations. So thank you. I will stop here and take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur Irene Gan. The floor is now open for questions. Anyone from the room and from the Zoom room? Okay, John Sichon from Rappler raised his hand. John, please go ahead with your question. Kindly unmute.
Yes. Hello, John Sichon from Rappler. Special Rapporteur, we also noted that the RSF and members of the UN also visited Frenchie May Cumpio earlier this month, and we wanted to know what had happened because apparently they were denied visit to the detained journalist. In fact, she's also one of the individuals that are still currently on the index for detainees of journalists that are still currently detained based on the RSF's international index. What are your thoughts on that?
What name did you mention?
CPJ, RSF, and FPU visited Frenchie, but
Yes,
denied.
yes. Actually, thank you for reminding me of one point that I also had in my notes, and that is the problem of arrests and then prolonged pre-trial detention or detention during trial. I think Franchi May's case is an example of that, where she was arrested in 2020. That is more than 5 years ago, and she still remains in prison without bail while her case is proceeding. And that is precisely a situation where it's a travesty of justice. It's a travesty of justice because the individual, even if she is found innocent, will have spent almost as much as she would have in prison had she been found guilty. So the justice system, the speed, the slowness of the justice system, the lack of speed of the proceedings means that people are being punished without being found guilty. And Franchi May seems to, and her two colleagues who were arrested with her, they seem to be, for some reason, I don't know exactly why the authorities are not considering approving her application for bail, and why the justice system hasn't woken up to the injustice that it is committing and accelerate her trial, and that of the two others who are with her. I think it's an absolute shame. And as you know, I visited Franchi May. I was the first, I think, foreign visitor that was allowed to visit her, and that was more than a year ago. So she's been 5 years in prison, 4 years without visitors, international visitors, and despite our interest and pressure, repeated pressure on the government, I've written about her case. The government's answer is that justice must take its course. But this is not injustice. It is injustice to lock her up while the trial proceeds at a snail's pace is no justice. And unfortunately, that is what worries me in the Philippines still, that although the government is trying or claims that it's trying its best to resolve problems, to improve the situation of journalists, nevertheless, certain practices of the past are still there. She claims she was a victim of red tagging prior to being arrested. She was then arrested under the previous regime, I think it was under the previous regime, and then now the trial continues for 5 years. That's half a decade. She was arrested when she was 20 years old, and now she's 25. I think this is a terrible, unjust case, and I'm glad you raised it. I hope the media, together with civil society, will continue to put pressure on the government. I certainly will. I believe this is absolutely a horrendous miscarriage of justice that is being carried out right under our very eyes.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur, for the answer. Any other questions from our colleagues in Manila or in the provinces? Okay, Raymond Villanueva from Codao Productions. Has Ms. Can been appraised of the Philippine government's reaction to her report? And what is her reaction into it?
The Philippine government, of course, I've had discussions with the government, not only in the council, but outside the council. And since my visit was last year, it's been a year, almost a year and a half, in this interim period as well, I've had discussions with the government. I've written to the government. I've handed over to them several individual cases, including that of Franchi May, but several others on which I've asked the government's response. The government has responded. I will go back because in a number of cases, I believe follow-up is needed. The government welcomes my report. However, they are looking at the recommendations one by one. They have accepted a couple of recommendations I had made about adoption of legislation to improve the condition of journalists. They have accepted that. On some of the others, as I said, when I mentioned that there should be a special prosecutor, they have reverted that they have a process which is similar. I don't think it is similar at all. I think they still need a special procedure. Obviously, the president's statement that he is willing to consider returning to the Rome Statute is a positive one. But the key issues on which I think they still need to act, in my view, is first in relation to red tagging. They must issue some kind of an official statement. What they're telling me is that they have no policy, they do not condone it. Well, if that is so, they should put that in an official executive order and make it very clear that when state officials are carrying out this practice, that there will be consequences for it. Unless that message comes out clearly, I don't think the practice will stop, and the government cannot simply say it doesn't have a policy. Its officials are carrying out something the government itself says it does not condone. So it's time for the government to act and make it very clear. And secondly, I think on the issue of impunity and protection of journalists, that needs to be strengthened, and human rights defenders, journalists and human rights defenders, because time and time again, we are seeing harassment, we're seeing arrests, we are seeing actually violence against them. That too, these are the two major issues. And then the legal system. There are some laws there, particularly the Anti-Terrorism Act, and also the Cybersecurity Act, which are being abused, and therefore they need to be clarified, reformed. The Supreme Court has taken some measures to improve the situation of those who are arrested under the Anti-Terrorism Act, but there still remain some other issues there, because the practice on the ground, the law is one thing, the practice another. So the practice has to be improved. We are in constructive dialogue between the government of Philippines and my mandate, and I want to actually acknowledge that, because that's positive. That's a good reaction. The government has not thrown my report out of the window. On the contrary, the government has said that it's willing to continue talking to me to discuss ways of finding some common ground and to make some improvements. And I'm very grateful to the government for its constructive approach to these issues.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Any other questions from our colleagues? I think John Vic or Gascon, Felino Antonio from GMA. Please
Yes.
go ahead.
May I ask a question? Yes, ma'am. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please proceed.
Hello, yes. Special Rapporteur, good afternoon. This is Chino Gaston from GMA 7. So while the Special Rapporteur lauds the handover of the former president to the ICC, does it also believe that the others mentioned in the case as principals and secondary principals, so to speak, be also handed over to face trial so that justice be met? And what does this adherence to the provisions of the Rome Statute grant the Philippines as being part of the community of nations? So was there also a recommendation on your part to hand over the others mentioned in the case? Thank you.
The number of other principal.
You're talking about the role of others who were involved with the president. Well, as you know, my mandate is on freedom of expression, and therefore I did not go into the whole issue of summary executions and unlawful killings that took place under the Duterte regime. Obviously, the government should act on impunity. The law, the international law is that the International Criminal Court is the court of last resort. Within the national system, the government should address impunity for the crimes that were committed during that period. And if the government fails to carry out its duty, then the ICC steps in. In the case of the former president, obviously the government administration was not in a position to take that case forward. The ICC stepped in, and the government has surrendered the accused there. There is no reason why the government should not investigate the remaining cases and act on them appropriately through its national justice system.
All right, thank you, Ms. Khan. From John Vic of One News and Philippine Star, halfway into the Marcos administration and ahead of the opening of the 20th Congress, do you have any key recommendations in terms of legislative measures? Would you like to see laws directly addressing red tagging, among others? Maybe aside from the executive order you already mentioned.
Well, I do have a whole list of laws that I have suggested to the government to repeal or revise, including the let me just look at my notes here. Yes, decriminalizing libel in the Cybercrime Prevention Act, reviewing and amending the Anti-Terrorist Act of 2020 to bring it in line with international human rights standards, and to adopt a law on access to information with maximum disclosure in the public interest. I believe that's absolutely important for civil society to be able to work properly, and also for media. And to adopt the Human Rights Defenders Protection Act, which I think was being discussed about a year and a half ago, and it still has not been adopted. And then in addition to that, I have suggested an executive order denouncing the practice of red tagging.
Thank you so much, Ms. Khan. Any follow-up questions or additional questions from our colleagues in Manila? All right, John Sichon again from Rappler. Has news of community journalist Deo Montes Claros case reached the special rapporteur? If so, would they have any opinion updates to offer on this case? He was charged in a terrorism financing case in January, like Frenchie in Colombia.
No, I don't think I have received that case. Of course, as you, and here, let me take the opportunity through the media to clarify that as special rapporteurs, we have the authority to receive communications, to receive complaints from individuals who believe that their rights have been violated, either from individuals or their representatives can approach us, and we will examine the case. And if we believe that there is a valid allegation there, we will take it up with the authorities. There have been a number of cases. I think my colleague will be able to correct me, about 25 cases. From the many petitions that I received when I was in the Philippines, I have selected about 25 cases and have taken them up with the government. The government has responded case by case, but most of these cases are of people who are being prosecuted for one offense or the other, where either the process, the trial process, is too long and not properly being carried out, or the people are still waiting to be tried. I feel that the government, what I've asked the government to do is to review these cases and see whether they really are valid cases to be prosecuted, and to dismiss them where there are no grounds. So there are dozens of cases like this in the Philippines. But as I said, please draw them to my attention, and I will be happy to look into them.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur. I think colleagues of DEO will reach out to your office. Marcel Ingles from Pinoy News, Pinoy Portal U.
Yes, Pinoy Portal U. I would like to know, Madam, what's the way forward in office after the presentation of the report? You mentioned that you would do your part in putting pressure on the government, and what are the things that you will be planning ahead? And would that conclude visiting the revisiting the Philippines? This is a serious concern because we know that the government is also eyeing and facing the security council, and one of the things that they are saying is that they have human rights, abuse human rights, and governance record. So would that be
Yeah.
a factor in
Yeah.
actually looking into this in that you that for audience?
Well, it's important to remember that this report, I have now handed it to the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is made up of member states. So that is actually now these governments, these other governments also have access to this report. And they also have a duty to take up these recommendations, to discuss these recommendations with the Philippines government. So in a way, this becomes now an obligation, a kind of obligation on the international community to follow up, as well as obviously the special procedures, not just myself, but other special procedures, my colleagues who are working, for example, on unlawful killings, or who are working on freedom of assembly and association, who are working on many numbers of other mandates. They can, human rights defenders mandate, for example, they can all now look at this report, take up the recommendations and engage with the government of the Philippines. Now, to the credit of the government of the Philippines, I must say that the government has engaged with mandate holders, and this administration has indicated that they are open to other, as you know, there were several mandate holders who visited the Philippines in the last year or so, and they're open to that. That is a change from the past, and that is a good change. The government is also open to other international mechanisms, international bodies, and the more it engages with the international community, the more the international community will demand that it show the path by following its own, its own international obligations. So I think that's a positive thing. The other point I wanted to make is that the government mentioned to me, they had noted that in my report, I talk about a dynamic civil society, and the government said that the dynamism of the civil society, of course, is a credit of civil society, but the administration feels that it is also an indication that the government is in favor of civil society. And I said, that's very good news. So do more, make it safer, stronger for everyone, bring them in, engage with them. Particularly with the new structures that have been created to replace, following the joint plan of action that the government had with the United Nations. They have now set up another structure. So bring civil society into it, make them a part of your joint endeavor to strengthen human rights. So there seems to be some willingness on the side of the government, but that willingness has to be translated into concrete actions.
Yes. Another question from our colleagues from other media. In its official comments to your report, the Philippine government claims that the conviction of Frenchie May Cumbio and her co-accused demonstrates adherence to due process and the rule of law. However, we respectfully wish to set the record straight. To date, Frenchie and her co-accused have not been convicted in any criminal case. The ruling the government cites refers solely to a civil forfeiture case concerning funds seized during their arrest, proceeding distinct from the still pending criminal charges. Given the significant factual inaccuracy, how do you assess the Philippine government's continued use of such narratives to justify prosecutions that many observers, including UN mandates, have flagged as politically motivated? And how might the UN system respond to state narratives that misinterpret ongoing cases while legitimate concerns on due process and misuse of anti-terrorism legislation remain unaddressed?
In the case of Frenchie May and her two colleagues, I made it very clear in my very recent discussions with senior officials that I would like to see some progress on those cases. I would like to see the government review the cases and see whether they are actually cases that should continue to be prosecuted within the system. Because to me, the age of the individuals, the way in which they were harassed prior to their arrest, the nature of the arrest, where a search was made of their premises in their absence and then so-called evidence turned up and so on, there is a very high likelihood of some impropriety there. Now, the court may eventually find that. You're absolutely right that they should not talk about her conviction because she has not been convicted, not yet. So, and it's very likely that she might, a person is innocent until they're proven guilty. So she is innocent. And the question is whether it is appropriate for the government to use the justice system for cases like this of young people. And then, particularly given that the justice system is so slow that there is no resolution of the case for more than half a decade. In that kind of a situation, the justice system almost becomes a system for harassing activists. And I would hope that the government will review these 3 cases. They have become emblematic cases. And what the government does on this case will be seen by the international community, will be watching. We will all be looking to see how the government handles it. So I hope that my report will create an impetus for the government to open that file, take a look at it, and seriously consider whether what is happening now is appropriate.
Thank you, Ms. Gan. Question from the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Jillian Villanueva. Can I also ask about the future endeavors of the Special Rapporteur in the Philippines? You mentioned the current administration was more open to suggestions. Do you already have scheduled meetings with government officials in the future? Thank you.
I had very recently, in fact, the day before my report was presented, I met with a senior delegate who had come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the government has raised some concerns it has on which it would like my advice. One of the issues it raised was disinformation, online disinformation and misinformation. That is a global phenomenon. It's happening in many other countries. It's happening also in the Philippines. The government wants to know what is good practice. And I said I would be very happy to work with the government to advise them on what should be done, because it's extremely important that freedom of expression, legitimate freedom of expression, is not restricted under the guise of fighting disinformation. And so that is where, again, international standards become important. And I think it's a good thing that the government is seeking the advice of the United Nations Special Procedures on a subject like that. And I hope there will be other issues too on which the government will reach out to me. As I said, it was a very constructive discussion. And I will, of course, visit if the government invites me to visit. But since it will not be a country visit, usually in the UN system, we do not repeat our country visits too closely after one after the other. I do not need to wait for an invitation. If there is a proper opportunity, I hope to visit the Philippines. And I would encourage civil society to continue pushing and pressing for change. In any country, there is plenty of room for improvement, and certainly in the Philippines, given the past histories. Keep pushing. As I said, it's very dynamic. I was very impressed with civil society. I've never received so many submissions and such active engagement with my mandate as I did in the Philippines. I think that is also something that will make sure that the government stays on the right path. It's at the end of the day, it is not the international system, it is not the Human Rights Council, it is not the special rapporteurs that bring about change in the ground. It's the people. It's the civil society organizations. And that is why it's very important for the government also to nurture society, because then you will get a proper inclusive change process. So I hope the government will get that message, how important civil society is and how much Philippines should be proud of its civil society.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Are there any questions before we proceed with other questions? I would just like to read the message from the Alter Media. The People's Alternative Media Network thanks you and your team, Ms. Khan, for your visit last year, your report and strong recommendations and commitment to continue helping us, particularly on the case of Frenchie May, Tumpio, Maria Dumigil, and Alexander Limuna. Maraming salamat po. Any other questions from our colleagues before we end the press conference?
When I said my last word to the press, please keep these issues alive in the media. Please keep reporting when cases drag on for too long. Please keep reporting when journalists are attacked or killed and crimes are not investigated, because you are a very, very important actor in strengthening human rights, in pointing out where human rights obligations are not being followed by the authorities. So please, I congratulate you and I encourage you to keep the focus on these human rights issues.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gan. Having no more questions from our colleagues, we end this press conference, and thank you, Special Rapporteur, for your time.
Recording stopped.